Hey everyone, it's Eric with SweetSpotDFS, and in this video, I'm going to explain what strokes gained are and how they're calculated. I'm also going to provide my pros and cons, a real-life example, and then show you how different shots affect strokes gained by using the strokes gained calculator you see on the screen. But first, I want to provide a little bit of an explanation. Strokes gained measures the quality of every golf shot, to put it simply. For every combination of distance and lie, the PGA Tour has a baseline or a benchmark for how many strokes an average PGA Tour player should finish that hole under or by. Let me show you what that looks like. So basically, the PGA Tour would access a database that looks similar to this, except for instead of 20-yard increments like I have, they have it by 1-foot increments. So basically, there isn't a shot the PGA has not seen and has not recorded. But it would use a database like this to find the baseline. First, you need to know the distance away from the hole. And second, you would need to know the lie of the golf ball. Let's pretend we're on a par 4 that's 440 yards away and we're on the tee box. Well, first of all, we'll, look at the yardage and cross-reference it against the lie. So obviously, it's a tee box, 440 yards away. The baseline would be 4.08. So the PGA Tour would be telling us we would need to finish that hole within 4.08 strokes, or that's what the baseline would be. If we finish underneath that, so if we finish the hole in 4 strokes, we would be gaining 0.08. If we finish it obviously in 3 strokes, we would be gaining 1.08. And the same is true on the opposite side. If we finished above that 4.08, we'd be losing strokes compared to how many strokes it took. I'll get further into other calculations, but I do want to mention that strokes gained are also adjusted by course difficulty and then field averages per round. It doesn't look at strength of field, but it looks at every round how the field has averaged during that round. And that's a good thing, because if you think about it, if you had 4 rounds of golf and on the very first round it was extremely windy and then the other 3 rounds had no wind whatsoever or no weather, say they were perfect days, it wouldn't make sense to compare those rounds equally. So the PGA Tour adjusts based off of that. They also adjust based off of course difficulty, which is also good. We wouldn't want to equally compare a golf tournament that had a winning score of -30 to a golf tournament that had a winning score of -6. Like, that just wouldn't make sense. There would be people in that field that finished 50th place or worse that probably would have better strokes gained than the golfers in that -6 tournament that finished, between 10th and 20th place. It would just be unfair, and it's a good thing that the PGA Tour adjusts accordingly. Now, there are a few things it doesn't adjust for, but I'll talk about those later. I do want to get into the strokes gained just to show you, if you are unfamiliar with them, what they are. So there's 4 main stroke categories or strokes gained categories: off the tee, approach, around the green, and putting. There are other categories, but these 4, in one way or another, are combined to make up those other ones. Those being total, strokes gained total, would combine off the tee, approach, around the green, and putting. Strokes gained tee to green would basically combine all of them except for putting. Obviously, it makes sense, tee to green. And then there's another one called ball striking that the PGA Tour has not recognized as a strokes gained category just yet, but a lot of people in the fantasy golf industry do use these as a metric. But that would be off the tee and approach, and it would make sense. Before any calculation is made, criteria needs to be met. So if we're on the tee, or I should say before off the tee strokes get calculated, we either need to be on the tee box of a par 4 or a par 5. It does not include par 3s. To come to think about it, if there was ever a par 6, it would also include that as well. But it excludes par 3s. Those are included in approach, which the criteria there is a golfer needs to be at least 30 yards away from the green. Likewise, around the green, a golfer needs to be within 30 yards of the green, but not on the green. And then putting is pretty self-explanatory. Like, it's anything that's on the putting surface. If you want to use a driver on the putting surface, a wedge, or anything like that, that's still going to look at It'll still be calculated under strokes gained putting. So let me show you how it's calculated. We'll go back to that chart and use that same example. We're on a par 4 that's 440 yards away. We already determined PGA Tour says, hey, you need to finish this hole we expect you to finish it 4.08 strokes. So 4.08, let's say we hit it 340 yards into the fairway. Now, we don't use that 340. We use the distance where the ball settled away from the hole. And in this case, it would be 100 yards. So we are 100 yards away after our tee ball from the green. So we would take this, we would first of all find the baseline from there. So we would cross-reference. We were in the fairway, 100 yards away from the green. That baseline is 2.8. Well, we minus 4.08 by that number, and then also by 1 because it took us 1 stroke to get there. I actually have that calculator right here, so I'll highlight it. You can see we're taking that cell minus that one, minus 1. We get 0.28. So that is how strokes gained are calculated. And if I wanted to show you how it would look like, all the way through a hole, so we have a par 4, 440 yards. Our tee shot goes, again, it was 340, but this is the yards remaining to the hole. And then we have to determine the lie, which is fairway. So you can see that 0.28 shows up. Now from here, I'm actually going to use the Ricky Fowler example that they have under the PGA Tour explaining strokes gained. We would go to 15 feet. I know he hit it 16 feet, but again, we're using increments by 20 yards. This is the best I can do. But he's on the green, 15 feet away, makes that putt, ends up holing it for birdie. So that is how all of the strokes gained would look. You would basically find the baseline of each of those remaining distances and minus it against the baseline you previously had or you were previously at. And that's how you come up with strokes gained for each one. And again, you have to meet that criteria. So how about, instead of hitting it, to 15 feet on the green, we actually hit it to 20 yards on, in the fringe or whatever. We're 20 yards away from the hole on the fringe. So obviously our approach looks really bad, but let's say we put it within 3 feet of the green. Now we take into account around the green because we're within 30 yards from the green. And not on the green. We're on the fairway. So therefore, we have to now account for around the green. And we put it to 3 feet, which was really good. And some people do miss that putt, but we're going to say we didn't miss that putt. We only gained 0.04 strokes on that 3-foot putt. So this is how it would look like for a hole. Now, you could easily I could easily just click and drag this all the way down to show you what that would look like if a robot were to play a hole the exact same way. We would gain 5.04 strokes. Now, remember, that's a 340-yard drive down the middle of the fairway. We're only gaining 5.04 all the way through. Now, from 100 yards away, if we only put it to 20 yards, to the pin, but in the fairway, look at how many we're losing throughout that entire round. You can't really gain that many strokes off of the tee. 340 in the middle of the fairway is really good, but we can only gain 5.04 throughout if we were to do that consistently for all 18 holes. But we can lose a lot of strokes off approach if obviously we don't hit a very good one. Let me show you a couple examples here of what can happen. So if we wanted to really lose strokes off the tee, I can't remember what it is, but if we had 200 yards away in the fairway, we'd be minus 111, 180. That would be 0. So a 440 yard par 4, if we leave ourselves 180 yards, we're not gaining anything and we're not losing anything. That is the 0 mark for off the tee for a 440 yard par 4. But let's say we hit it. I used the Ricky Fowler example, and I actually had this up. I forgot to use it, but this is exactly what he ended up doing. 330 yards, had 160 yards left to go into the green. Obviously, he hit it to within 15 feet and made the putt. But let's say he hit it into the water. Now, he has a couple options. he could re-tee, or he could drop a couple feet in front of him on the tee box, but it wouldn't be considered off the tee. It'd be considered in the fairway if he wanted to drop. I'll show you what that would look like both ways. So if he hit it and he decided he wanted to re-tee, we would take that same yardage he just had. The lie would be off of the tee. We would add a penalty stroke because it took him 2 strokes to get there. So it's 1 stroke plus the penalty, and he's re-teeing. So he would lose right away for hitting into the water 2 strokes. Now, if he were to hit it from there to the exact same yardages he had, 100 yards away in the fairway, he's going to gain a little bit, but overall for that hole, he's going to lose. What would happen if he decided he wanted to drop 20 yards in front of him? Instead of off the tee, it's going to be off the fairway, and he's actually going to lose strokes, lose more strokes for dropping as opposed to re-teeing. And obviously that makes sense because it's a little bit more difficult to hit a ball off of the ground, at that distance, as opposed to teeing a ball down and using a driver. But if we were to say from there, he hits at 260 yards, because really I don't see him hitting it any further than that to the fairway, and then say he puts it within 15 feet of the pin, now the stats look a little bit different, a little bit better. He didn't gain anything off the tee from his, well, first of all, he dropped, so the off the tee doesn't change. The approach looks okay because he had 2 approach shots, if you think about it, from 420 yards away into the green. Even with that, that drop, that's considered an approach shot from there going forward. And then his second one would be 116 to 15 feet. So that's what it would look like for those 2 separate examples. I want to actually provide one example from Justin Thomas's round 3 of the Tournament Champions in 2021. Throw this down because he actually had really good strokes gain approach numbers. When we compare it to what the PGA Tour actually gave, I do have the sheet here that shows what it ended up being. You can see if we compare, my calculator versus what actually ended up happening. The PGA Tour said he lost 0.2 strokes. On my calculator, it says lost 0.3. And you can see the rest of the categories here for that round. The big difference that I see is off the tee and approach. So I have it at 0.20 that he's gaining. PGA Tour has minus 1.41. I have 4.58 gaining. PGA Tour has 2.19 gaining. Now, I think that's because it was adjusted based off of that round against the field, which would make sense. But either way, he gained pretty decently approach. Those would be good numbers for any PGA standard or PGA Tour standard. And I found out why he gained so many strokes. As I was going through this, I was kind of surprised. And it starts with the par 3 hole 2, or the par 3 on hole 2. It was 220 yards away, and he parked it 5 feet away from the hole. Like, obviously that's a really good shot, but I want to show you how many strokes he gained off of this. So if I delete this, pay attention to the approach, it's almost a full stroke that he gained with that one shot. So it went from 4.58 to 3.64 just on that one shot. Or I should say it went the opposite way, 3.64 to 4.58. But shots like that really, determine, I shouldn't say determine, but to me, it's a good shot regardless. And the reason why is because of the putting. When it comes to the putting, the percentage of making a putt goes considerably up from 10 feet and in. If you were to look at every foot on this, this graph right here, you can see you're gaining like 0.08 all the way up. Putting it like the difference between 5 feet and 10 feet is 0.4 strokes almost. And the difference between 5 feet and 15 feet is 0.5. So it's, you're gaining those on your approach shot because you're leaving yourself a better putt to make, like giving yourself a better chance to make that putt. Obviously, the closer you get. So that's why some guys' approach stats look really good. And when you can hit a ball, like the further you are away from the hole and the tougher the lie, the better result you're going to have with approach stats. So I want to point that out because you should keep an eye out for that kind of stuff. When you are analyzing, I'm in the golf industry or I'm in the fantasy golf industry. If you're analyzing fantasy golf numbers, pay attention to certain shots because they're probably the make or break that makes a golfer look really good. And actually, this brings me to my next point. The issues that I have with strokes gained, the first one of them being it doesn't account for strength of field. And I'm going to bring up 3 examples. All have Webb Simpson in them. Webb Simpson lost 6.57 strokes tee to green or off the tee at the Tournament of Champions. He was in the same field as Bryson DeChambeau, who obviously is trying to revolutionize the game with his distance of 6.53. Webb never really hits the ball this bad. And I know he had a penalty shot within this round. He may have had 2, which could account for it, but minus 6.57 is that's crazy. When we compare it to his Sony Open, which was the week after, he was gaining 1.7. And when we compare it against his RSM Classic, he gained 2.89. Those considerably lesser or weaker fields, which would mean if we did by strength of field, these numbers would look a little worse if you think about it. Which I guess I'm okay with. Like Webb Simpson on a tournament to tournament basis isn't going to look as bad as he did at the Tournament of Champions. I think the Tournament of Champions, that should be adjusted, maybe, I don't know. I feel like it shouldn't be adjusted the way it was. Maybe not. If you disagree, give me your feelings in the comment section, because personally, I'm kind of conflicted. Like, I agree and I don't. But I do believe that the PGA Tour should consider accounting for strength of field. Because, I want to mention that too, when you look at short-term analysis, those numbers are going to be very skewed. 6.57, if you just remove it, Webb Simpson looks considerably better. It was one round that you're judging him based off of, against someone like a Bryson DeChambeau. When the field average, changes like that, it's not fair for someone like Webb Simpson, and you shouldn't really judge him based off of that. Like, those stats shouldn't be included, because if you think about it, for the next 2 months, you're probably going to be taking in that data from the Tournament of Champions, and it's just not an honest reflection of how he played during that round. So those are my 2 cents with that. Like, regression is going to bring the numbers back to the mean, but you got to be careful about short-term analysis. The second issue is it doesn't account for the difficulty of the shot. You've heard this before. A 6-footer uphill, a straight 6-foot uphill putt is different than a 6-foot breaking putt downhill. That's like a no-brainer. If you have a little slider, it's a little bit more difficult to make than having a straight uphill putt. I know there were people, I think, on Twitter that were trying to judge based off, or, brought that issue up or tried to like engage with the audience, try to figure out what's right. And I believe they had, statistics that would prove it wrong. Like, you want the downhill putt, but there's psychology that also goes into it. Like, I get it, I understand, but a 6-foot downhill putt is not the same as a 6-foot uphill putt. And that also applies with chipping and pitching. You could also apply it to other types of golf shots as well, where it's not the same. But the third one is kind of similar to that. It has to do with the exact lie. So if we hit a ball in the fairway and it rests in a divot, that shouldn't be looked at equally as someone else who was in the fairway. The 2 shots are different. One is kind of, you have no worries about, and the other one you have to clip absolutely perfectly. I mean, you want to clip everything perfectly, but you have to put a different swing in a divot than you do with any other shot. Likewise, or another example would be like at the US Open where there were different lengths of rough. If you found yourself in a tuff of rough that was longer than anything around you, that would be also unfair to judge based on, like, compared to another golfer who was 5 feet left or right of you, but the same distance in and in the rough, but not having as bad of a lie. So those are like the three main cons that I have that I don't think is very fair. So let me show you just a few things on the calculator here, and then we'll get out of here. But I wanted to show you one fascinating one that I saw. So if you remember, I think it was 2018, Dustin Johnson drove a green and almost made a hole-in-one. It was a 420-yard par 4 at the Tournament of Champions. He put it within 3 feet of the green. Just to show you what that looks like off the tee, he gained 1.98 strokes. So something like that's pretty crazy. Now, what would happen if he holed it? All I have to do is just put H here. I don't have to put any distance, but he would have gained 3.02, which makes sense because the expected par is 4.02 and he made a 1. So 4.02 minus 1, obviously 3.02. Let's see, let's just keep that up and use let's go par 5 and go 580. Or let's go 600. Make it real long. Let's say someone hits a 400-yard drive and he has 200 yards left to go in the fairway. You're only gaining 0.63 strokes off the tee. That shows you the difference of like strokes gained off the tee versus approach. Let's say you had a 300-yard approach. So I'm going to change this to 300 yards remaining, and you put this within 60 feet of the green or 60 feet of the hole. You'd gain 0.57. That's not terrible. Let's cut that in half. 30 feet away, 0.8. How about 10 feet away, 1.17. That doesn't look that great. I mean, obviously you can lose strokes pretty easily, but think about that. You're hitting a 290-yard approach shot to 10 feet away and you're only gaining 1.17. I mean, I don't know. That doesn't sit well with me. I mean, if we were to use that Justin Thomas one, say let's go 260. I suppose you put it to 5 feet away, right? $1.22, 1.17. So you're not really gaining that many strokes between the two. That is, I mean, this is the first time I really looked at it. I'm just kind of playing around with it right now. 1.22, 1.17. That's insane. A 290-yard shot is okay. It's not that insane. I understand why. We're going to 5 feet. We're not really comparing apples to apples. Let's say we put it within 5 feet of the green. I'm sure it's going to look way better now. 1.55 versus 1.22. Okay, yep, that makes sense. But it's just to show you you're only gaining 0.3, 30 yards difference, or 40 yards difference, I should say. If you want to see some other calculations and you want me to make a video, I certainly can. But I'm going to leave it here. I think I gave a pretty good explanation and showed you, pretty good examples. I mean, all in all, I think strokes gained are the best metrics that we have today in golf. It's really definitely the better way of measuring a golfer's performance, especially when you consider what the traditional statistics were. Off the tee, we're considering accuracy as well as distance, and we're considering where we're placing the ball. How many yards away from the hole do we have? What is the scoring opportunity? So strokes gained is considering all that instead of having to look at proximity plus green and reg plus driving distance plus driving accuracy. It's all kind of baked into one. So, I mean, it's really the best stat we have. Now, I also wouldn't just blindly throw your trust into it, because like I kind of showed, there are some things that can skew those numbers that you have to keep your eyes open for. You know, whether it was a lucky shot or perhaps just a bad break, those are going to drastically change what those strokes gained are. So definitely keep in mind for those things. I mean, it's far from perfect, but you know, it's still the best we have. So with that, I'm going to bid adieu. Thank you guys for watching. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you later. All right, bye.